Good evening and welcome to this evening's installment of Democracy 30. My name is Oliver Dixon. Thank you so much for joining us. Each week on this show, we take a look at the 30 years of democracy that we've had in South Africa and ask various questions about the quality of life that we live today. Tonight is no different. Tonight we take a look at basic education and we ask the question, what is the state of South Africa's basic education system? The pre-democratic aspirations of a free, equal and universal education system found expression in Section 29 of the South African Constitution, which guarantees the right to basic education. While access has been accelerated over the last 30 years, contestations remain about the quality and substance of our basic education system. Tonight we ask, what is the state of South Africa's basic education system 30 years after democracy? With us to discuss this matter are Elijah Mhlanga, the spokesperson for the Minister of Basic Education, Prof. Nadine Peterson, Dean of Education at the University of Johannesburg, and Dr. Andrea Jean, Senior Research Specialist at the Equitable Education and Economics for Economics at the Human Science Research Council. But before we go ahead, let's take a look at this insert put together by Democracy 30 producer Nadia Dambuze.
For my husband.
After many years of colonial segregation, South Africa's education problems became explicit in the late 1940s, culminating in the Bantu Education Act of 1953. Under the Department of Native Affairs, the act legalized a separate, unequal system of black education with centralized control, inferior funding and paternalism. Separateness had to be entrenched in all aspects of society if apartheid's ideology was to succeed. African learners would be taught to be hewers of wood and drawers of water for a white-run economy and society, regardless of their abilities and aspirations.
Our young men and women will be in the vanguard of any struggle for existence the future may bring. We have no fear. We love South Africa. This is our land of hope and glory. We shall not fail her or any of those who depend upon us. Be of good cheer. The will to win through is there.
After 1994, under the new democratic constitution and through the 1996 South African Schools Act and other legislation, the government had to reshape the racially based system to one standardized education system for all South Africans.
Education is one of the most important weapons in a country. And the extent to which black education is neglected is something very difficult to put in words.
While access to public basic education has increased over the past 3 decades, with specified poverty-stricken schools, declared no-fee schools, concerns remain about the persistent inequalities, inadequate infrastructure, overcrowding, poorly trained teachers, and the quality of the public education system. The 2023 Progress in International Reading Literacy study showed that 81% of grade 4 children in South Africa are unable to read for meaning. These systematic inequalities became apparent during the COVID-19 epidemic lockdown, where poor learners lacked resources to continue with uninterrupted education. South Africa's National Development Plan Vision for 2030 aimed to, among others, eliminate school infrastructure deficiencies by 2016. But this goal is yet to be achieved, as there are still mud schools and pit latrines in some rural areas. Nadia Dambuze, Democracy 30.
And of course, that is a beautiful way to start the conversation this evening by asking the question, what is the state of South Africa's basic education system 30 years after democracy? Joining me is Elijah Mhlanga, the spokesperson to the Minister of Basic Education, as well as Professor Nadine Peterson, Dean of Education at the University of Johannesburg. Elijah, I'm going to start with you. Yeah. What is the state, what is the story of basic education in South Africa over the last 30 years? How would you encapsulate the journey we've traveled?
Well, good evening, Oliver. It's work in progress. That's the summary of it. Because in 1994, democracy is attained. We find a country with 19 different education administrations, which means you've got a country which is split into 19 different parts when it comes to education. So in 94, 95, you have commissions that are looking at the different aspects of education and what needs to be done. 95, we deliberate on the Schools Act and how the future should look like. How do we govern education? what administrative tools do we need to make sure that we're able to transform the system from all those 19 parts into one. Come 1996, we passed the South African Schools Act, which is the law that then governed the system. So about 97, 98, 99, there was a lot of systems that were being put into place. And then come 2000, 2001, that's when we begin to do research and say, how many children do we have that are accessing early childhood development? You find that there are about 300,000. And then you begin the task of making sure that those children are given access to education, which is what we've been referring to in the clip and also in the introduction. So that's what we've been doing. So access has been achieved. We are at 99.9% of children who should be in school. And then after that, you then find that there are schools that communities build in terms of the infrastructure, which is where these children should go. You find that communities in about 95, 96, communities were still building schools for themselves because the apartheid government did not build schools in certain parts. These are the mud schools that we've been eradicating. You come to teachers, you find that as well. The training was not the same, because there were homelands and with their teacher training colleges. Now you need to bring all those former homeland teachers into a single system. You find that there are disparities when it comes to the salaries. Now you have to put it somewhere at a particular level. So who do you use as your benchmark? You had to make a determination on that as well. In fact, you also found disparities where men and women were not even earning the same. So you now had to fix that too. These gender matters also came into play. Yeah. After that, you then had to deal with the issue of the curriculum. So what form of curriculum should be in place? Because each one of the 19 different systems were running their own story. And now you need to find the one that should fit the South African situation, fit for purpose, preparing the children for the future. That's when you started considering different options. Until 2009, when the ruling party took a decision to split education, that's when you then had basic education in May 2009 and higher education as well. That afforded the country to have a greater focus on both levels of education in the country. So most of the things that we talk about today, most of the research papers that we talk about today came about because there was a greater focus being placed on basic education and telling us what it is that we needed to do. And we then started to participate as well on international research studies to say, so for us...
Can I pause you there? Because I do want us to speak about international benchmarking studies that places South Africa relative to its peers across the world. But Dr. Andrea Jean, I want to bring you in here. Dr. Andrea Jean, Senior Research Specialist in the Equitable Education and Economics Division at the Human Science Research Council. Are we better off today? Are we in a better place with basic education today, 30 years after democracy, than we were over the last 30 years progressively?
So I mean, that is a tough question, and like Mr. Mhlanga says, it is a work in progress. I'm speaking not just as an academic who studies education in South Africa, but I'm also a product of this public education system. And so from those perspectives, I can say, yes, in a lot of aspects, the system has improved and we are heading in the right direction. But in terms of, the ideals that we wanted coming into this democratic dispensation of equity, redress, and moving towards excellence in our system, we are falling behind.
Yeah. Perhaps to then ask what's going on inside of the system, Prof, is to ask the question, do we have the right institutional direction in basic education? Do we have the right teachers? Do we have the right leaders in basic education? Or have we fallen by the wayside?
It's a very good question. I don't think there's an absolute answer, yes or no. I think we're somewhere in the middle. We do have good policies in place. We have incrementally over the last 30 years put policies in place for basic education, but also for teacher education, which directly impacts upon the state of basic education. And so we have made sufficient progress in that respect. However, we can't take away from that teachers who are not fit for purpose, education officials who don't do what they are required to do. So I don't think this is a simple yes or no answer. I think there's a continuum. And I agree with both my colleagues. We are a work in progress. We have seen
Do we know
a
the
lot.
teachers that are not fit for purpose?
I think we do have some understanding within the system of teachers who are not fit for purpose. Remember that many of the teachers in the system, myself included, were a product of old colleges of education, which may not have prepared all teachers adequately for the job that they are required to do in schools today. Never mind the many educational reforms that we've had over the 30 years. Have they been adequately trained? Now, one could say that's the job of the Department of Basic Education, that's the job of teacher education, teacher professional development. I think that our accountability measures may not be sufficient for ensuring that the teachers we do have in the system are able, all of them, to ensure learning outcomes for our children.
Elijah, where are we getting accountability wrong? The department is an oversight authority as much as it's a policy implementation authority. Why is it that we have teachers in the system who are not fit for purpose?
Well, Oliver, in every workplace, in every sector, you'll have people who are not fit for purpose. So this is not exclusive to education. But we have over 420,000 teachers in the system. So it's a huge system. It's highly unlikely that you'll have angels right across in every one of the 25,000 schools. So they are there, but remember, we're also dealing with some of the people, as the Prof said, some of the people from the past whose training is different to what the country needs right now. So what we do is to train them even when they're at work. We've got institutions like the South African Council for Educators, who are the custodian of the professionalism and discipline when it comes to the teacher profession. It is them who certify teachers, give them legal permission to practice as teachers. So they are part of that mechanism put in place for accountability. But we work very closely as well with our 5 teacher unions in the system. There's a labor peace now because everyone understands that we have a common goal. We need to stop haggling about minor things and focus on improving our teaching as a profession that should be preferred by those that want to participate in the democracy and building of this country for the future.
After the break, I want us to focus on the substance of what we're actually teaching in our classrooms and ask the question whether or not our curriculum is fit for purpose. You can be a part of this conversation. Let us know what your thoughts are by simply sending us a tweet on X, #democracy30, or find me on Twitter. It is at Oliver_speaking over there. Let's take a break. On the other side of this, we continue the program.
National and provincial elections will have 3 ballot papers. For the National Assembly,
Welcome back to Democracy 30. We're talking about the state of South Africa's basic education system and ask ourselves the question, where are we 30 years into democracy when it comes to basic education? Let's have a look at some of the numbers that define basic education and what's been happening in the system over the last 30 years. Of course, these are non-exhaustive numbers. I want to take your attention to this particular graph. This graph indicates to us, and this was put together by the good people at passmark.org.za, about the number of learners that entered the schooling system in 2005. And of course, this is only reflective over a 12-year period since then. About 1.2 million learners started school in the year 2005. And that is indicated by the purple graph over there, 100%, right? Over the years, this is what happened. By the time they got to grade 12, 50% of them had fallen by the wayside, either failed a grade along the way or had fallen off the bandwagon altogether. Only 37% of those who started grade 1 in 2005 managed to pass matric. And of those that passed matric, only 13% of those who started school in 2005, grade 1, managed to pass matric, good enough to get into a university entrance. Elijah, what happened to the more than 1.1 million learners along the way between 2005 and by the time they got to matric?
A lot of things. Some of them passed away. We know that when we start the year, we report on accidents that are taking place across the country through the learner transport program, and some of them, they pass away through accidents. In fact, just 4 days ago or so, we heard that the person who drove a truck in Pongola and KZN, where 18 learners were killed in one accident, has been sentenced to jail for 23 years. I'm just giving just one example. That's the first part. The others are...
How significant of a contributing factor is that to the attrition that we see there?
Because over 12 years, it's a big number. So it's not a small number.
Come on, it's not a 1.1 million over 12 years, is it?
I was just giving one sector. The others are in prison.
Okay.
Others are in centers where young people are put to stay because they are in conflict with the law. You can ask the Department of Social Development, they will tell you. But the Department of Higher Education will also tell you that some are in TVET colleges, which is where they are completing their education. And then there are those who have dropped out and are sitting at home. And we wonder what their parents are saying to them when you decide to just sit at home with your own parents, with your own family, who don't tell you to go to school. And then there are those who are repeating grades in the school. They're still there, they are delayed. In fact, there's no education system anywhere in the world which is able to progress and see everyone who started school finishing. So some of them, because of education difficulties, we are not gifted in the same way. But we also saw through research that some of them, they just simply say they are bored. The curriculum doesn't have that which they want. That's why in the past 5-6 years, we've introduced 34 new subjects to make sure that everyone is covered in there to address the whole issue of the dropout rate. But you also have others who drop out of school because they need to go work, from child-headed families who must go and work. So you also have the complexity of social issues that impact on the children's progress in their educational journey. So they choose and have to do other things.
Andrea, do we have the right answers to some of these problems around how do we keep these learners in the schooling system and how do we get them to complete within 12 years? Or do we not have the policy imagination for it?
I'm not sure. So this is one of the kind of policy weaknesses that the system has. We have almost universal enrollment up to grade 9, which is also the age where it is compulsory to be in school, and this very big drop-off in the FET phase from grade 10, 11, and 12. And the reasons for dropout or having staggered or stopped education journeys are various. Some of them are also because there's a lack of labor market relevance for the education system. Our people who leave with grade 12 certificates able to access the labor market easily. So is it just easier to drop out at grade 10 and get a job there? And there are other societal issues, like we mentioned, child rearing or looking after families. and those sort of issues. So there is policy that can be implemented at the school level to make the education that is being given to these children more relevant and more useful, that they would be able to earn livelihoods after. But policies that are more geared towards society in general as safety nets for learners to help you stay in school.
Let's have a look at the actual numbers when we talk about dropout rates in South Africa. This graphic represents the number of South African children out of school between the years 2002 and 2021. 2002, we had 1.3 learners, 1.4 almost learners, 1.4 million learners not in school who were supposed to be in school. But by 2017, we'd been able to get that number down to 280,000, which is a more than 1 million reduction in that. Something went right along the way, Elijah, but something after 2017 went horribly wrong. Do we know what went wrong?
Well, it's a variety of things. We also have the population increasing, and we're also seeing more people coming to the urban centers. When they get there, they can't find space for education. We know it happens in the urban centers, whether you go to KZN, Limpopo, Western Cape, Gauteng, is the same story. So it could be that reason, but unfortunately we are not able to account for that. We can only account for those that are in school. There we can only speculate, and in fact we're grateful to Stats SA that they're able to give us these figures, and we're able to use them for decision making in the sector.
What's happening in schools, Prof, that we're not keeping learners there? Can we not capture them and retain their imagination? Are they bored, as Elijah said, and as Andrea said, that sometimes there's no labor market relevance for what they find in school? How do principals and teachers not keep learners in school, especially those who just decide to go and sit at home?
I think that's part of the problem, but I don't think, and I'm going to come back to that, I don't think this is simply a basic education problem. It's a societal problem. We can't lay the issue for learner dropout entirely within the Department of Basic Education's realm of responsibility. To what extent are issues of food security, learner pregnancy, all of those kind of factors, which are actually bigger societal issues. Kids not being able to have funding to get to school in the first place. If you think about rural learners, the dangers they face moving 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers having to get to school. So there are bigger issues that impact upon this. That's not only basic education's problem. However, we also must be introspective and say, from a schooling perspective, what are we not doing right in the schooling system? It pains me as a teacher educator today to hear that from my students that there's still corporal punishment in schools. That is an issue. It's against the law. And yet children in our system are still being punished physically.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. So it's a combination of issues. And I think where we want to get back to is how do we address where there is a problem in schools, such as teacher apathy, and it's not all teachers. I'm not here to bash teachers, please understand that. Because the far greater majority of teachers are doing what they are supposed to be doing. What concerns me is that often the culture of a school can be turned around by teachers who don't do what they are supposed to
Absolutely.
do.
Yeah. Prof, what's happening in our curriculum? What are we teaching? Are we teaching quality education? And I ask this because, as you would have heard in the opening, our producer, Nadine, put together a beautiful package illustrating to us that grade 4 learners in this country can't read for meaning. That's worrying that we can't have 10-year-olds be able to read for meaning. What's happening in the classroom from a pedagogy perspective that we're not getting right?
I think we've got a long ways to go, and I like my colleagues' words, we're a work in progress. We've moved in the education system from rote learning, which didn't achieve what it was supposed to do prior to 1994, and that was part of the reason for many of the educational reforms. I think we're still struggling with pedagogical aspects. We tend to tick off curriculum coverage. What does curriculum coverage actually mean? Are our kids learning, or are we simply covering the curriculum in a tick box approach? And that's something that concerns me as we prepare teachers for schools. Are our kids actually learning the kinds of skills that they should be learning? It's not just about content, it's also about critical thinking, problem solving, all of the skills we need in a fast changing world like we're living in now. And I'm not sure our training, both in service as well as pre-service teacher education, actually achieves the ideals that it's supposed to in this respect.
Andrew, I want to ask you this. Are international benchmarking tests, the type that tell us that here's where the country's numeracy and literacy levels are at, are those tests useful?
Oh, they're extremely useful. The assessments that we participate in are the polls that you mentioned earlier, the Trends in International Maths and Science Study, and the Southern and Eastern Africa Consortium for Monitoring Education Quality Study. They help us to look at the health of our system, but also to benchmark ourselves against other nations. And in so doing, we're able to inform policies based on that data that is comparative and is good quality. What we've learned is invaluable from these assessments. If we take the 2013 SACMEC tests, that tests grade 6 children in Southern and Eastern Africa, we see that South African learners perform at the average of the 15 participating countries. Most of the countries are poorer than South Africa. So that really tells us about the inefficiencies in our system, given that we spend so much of the GDP on education. We score lower than countries like Kenya, Mauritius, Botswana. The TIMS, which is a Maths and Science International Study, in 2019, we saw that our grade 9 learners were performing lower than countries that had lower GDPs than us, so Egypt, Jordan, Georgia. And so this helps us to have goals for how we can improve in these tests, but also what are the weaknesses in our system.
Elijah, are we learning anything from this in 30 seconds?
Absolutely. We pay to participate in these benchmark studies because we want to know what is happening in the system. So it's part and parcel of the building and strengthening of the education system as part of the big project of transforming education in the country. We need it.
That's where we're going to have to leave it. I just want to say thank you to my guests. Really do appreciate your time and your insights this evening. Of course, it is an inexhaustive conversation, and the talking and the work for it continues nonetheless. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so thank you so much to you at home for watching. If you've missed any of our episodes, go on to our YouTube channel, which is SABC News, and you can watch it over there. Or you can simply just follow me on Twitter as we continue to engage on critical conversations around the last 30 years of democracy. I am Oliver Dixon. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Really do appreciate it.
National